Invisible Man by Ralph Ellison. Prologue. I am an invisible man. No, I am not a spook like those who haunted Edgar Allan Poe, nor am I one of your Hollywood movie ectoplasms. I am a man of substance, of flesh and bone, fiber and liquids, and I might even be said to possess a mind. I am invisible, understand, simply because people refuse to see me. Like the bodiless heads you see sometimes in circus sideshows, it is as though I have been surrounded by mirrors of hard, distorting glass. When they approach me, they see only my surroundings, themselves, or figments of their imagination. Indeed, everything and anything except me. Nor is my invisibility exactly a matter of a biochemical accident to my epidermis. That invisibility to which I refer occurs because of a peculiar disposition of the eyes of those with whom I come in contact, a matter of the construction of their inner eyes, those eyes with which they look through their physical eyes upon reality. I am not complaining, nor am I protesting either. It is sometimes advantageous to be unseen, although it is most often rather wearing on the nerves. Then, too, you're constantly being bumped against by those of poor vision, or again you often doubt if you really exist. You wonder whether you aren't simply a phantom in other people's minds, say, a figure in a nightmare which the sleeper tries with all his strength to destroy. It's when you feel like this that, out of resentment, you begin to bump people back. And let me confess, you feel that way most of the time. You ache with the need to convince yourself that you do exist in the real world, that you're a part of all the sound and anguish, and you strike out with your fists, you curse and you swear to make them recognize you. And alas, it's seldom successful. One night I accidentally bumped into a man, and perhaps because of the near darkness he saw me and called me an insulting name. I sprang at him, seized his coat lapels, and demanded that he apologize. He was a tall, blond man, and as my face came close to his, he looked insolently out of his blue eyes and cursed me, his breath hot in my face as he struggled. I pulled his chin down sharp upon the crown of my head, butting him as I had seen the West Indians do, and I felt his flesh tear and the blood gush out, and I yelled, "Apologize! Apologize!" But he continued to curse and struggle, and I barred him again and again until he went down heavily, on his knees, profusely bleeding. I kicked him repeatedly in a frenzy because he still uttered insults, though his lips were frothy with blood. Oh yes, I kicked him, and in my outrage I got out my knife and prepared to slit his throat right there beneath the lamplight, in the deserted street, holding him in the collar with one hand and opening the knife with my teeth, when it occurred to me that the man had not seen me, actually, that he, as far as he knew, was in the midst of a walking nightmare. And I stopped the blade, slicing the air as I pushed him away, letting him fall back to the street. I stared at him hard as the lights of a car stabbed through the darkness. He lay there moaning on the asphalt, a man almost killed by a phantom. It unnerved me. I was both disgusted and ashamed. I was like a drunken man myself, wavering about on weakened legs. Then I was amused. Something in this man's thick head had sprung out and beaten him within an inch of his life. I began to laugh at this crazy discovery. Would he have awakened at the point of death? Would death himself have freed him for wakeful living? But I didn't linger. I ran away into the dark, laughing so hard I feared I might rupture myself. The next day I saw his picture in the Daily News, beneath a caption stating that he had been mugged. Poor fool, poor blind fool, I thought with sincere compassion, mugged by an invisible man. Most of the time, although I do not choose as I once did to deny the violence of my days by ignoring it, I am not so overtly violent. I remember that I am invisible, and walk softly so as not to awaken the sleeping ones. Sometimes it is best not to awaken them. There are few things in the world as dangerous as sleepwalkers. I learned in time, though, that it is possible to carry on a fight against them without their realizing it. For instance, I have been carrying on a fight with monopolated light and power for some time now. I use their service and pay them nothing at all, and they don't know it. Oh, they suspect that power is being drained off, but they don't know where. All they know is that according to the master meter back there in their power station, a hell of a lot of free current is disappearing somewhere into the jungle of Harlem. The joke, of course, is that I don't live in Harlem, but in a border area. Several years ago, before I discovered the advantages of being invisible, I went through the routine process of buying service and paying their outrageous rates. But no more. I gave up all that, along with my apartment and my old way of life. That way based upon the fallacious assumption that I, like other men, was visible. Now, aware of my invisibility, I live rent-free in a building rented strictly to whites. in a section of the basement that was shut off and forgotten during the 19th century, which I discovered when I was trying to escape in the night from Rast the Destroyer. But that's getting too far ahead of the story, almost to the end, although the end is in the beginning and lies far ahead. The point now is that I found a home, or a hole in the ground, as you will. Now don't jump to the conclusion that because I call my home a hole, it is damp and cold like a grave. There are cold holes and warm holes. Mine is a warm hole. And remember, a bear retires to his hole for the winter and lives until spring. Then he comes strolling out like the Easter chick breaking from its shell. I say all this to assure you that it is incorrect to assume that, because I am invisible and live in a hole, I am dead. I am neither dead nor in a state of suspended animation. Call me Jack the Bear, for I am in a state of hibernation. My hole is warm and full of light, yes, full of light. I doubt if there is a brighter spot in all New York than this hole of mine, and I do not exclude Broadway, or the Empire State Building on a photographer's dream night. But that is taking advantage of you. Those two spots are among the darkest of our whole civilization. Pardon me, our whole culture. An important distinction, I've heard, which might sound like a hoax or a contradiction, but that, by contradiction I mean, is how the world moves. Not like an arrow, but a boomerang. Beware of those who speak of the spiral of history. They are preparing a boomerang. Keep a steel helmet handy. I know. I have been boomeranged across my head so much that I now can see the darkness of lightness. And I love light. Perhaps you'll think it strange that an invisible man should need light, desire light, love light. But maybe it is exactly because I am invisible. Light confirms my reality, gives birth to my form. A beautiful girl once told me of a recurring nightmare in which she lay in the center of a large dark room and felt her face expand until it filled the whole room, becoming a formless mass while her eyes ran in bilious jelly up the chimney. And so it is with me. Without light I am not only invisible, but formless as well. And to be unaware of one's form is to live a death. I myself, after existing some 20 years, did not become alive until I discovered my invisibility. That is why I fight my battle with monopolated light and power. The deeper reason, I mean. It allows me to feel my vital aliveness. I also fight them for taking so much of my money before I learned to protect myself. In my hole in the basement there are exactly 1,369 lights. I've wired the entire ceiling, every inch of it, and not with fluorescent bulbs, but with the older, more expensive to operate kind, the filament type. An act of sabotage, you know. I've already begun to wire the wall. A junk man I know, a man of vision, has supplied me with wire and sockets. Nothing, storm or flood, must get in the way of our need for light, and ever more and brighter light. The truth is the light, and light is the truth. When I finish all 4 walls, then I'll start on the floor. Just how that will go, I don't know. Yet when you have lived invisible as long as I have, you develop a certain ingenuity. I'll solve the problem. And maybe I'll invent a gadget to place my coffee pot on the fire while I lie in bed. And even invent a gadget to warm my bed, like the fellow I saw in one of the picture magazines, who made himself a gadget to warm his shoes. Though invisible, I am in the great American tradition of tinkers. That makes me kin to Ford, Edison, and Franklin. Call me, since I have a theory and a concept, a thinker-tinker. Yes, I'll warm my shoes, they need it. They're usually full of holes. I'll do that and more. Now I have 1 radio phonograph. I plan to have 5. There is a certain acoustical deadness in my hole, and when I have music I want to feel its vibration, not only with my ear, but with my whole body. I'd like to hear 5 recordings of Louis Armstrong playing and singing What Did I Do to Be So Black and Blue, all at the same time. Sometimes now I listen to Louis while I have my favorite dessert of vanilla ice cream and sloe gin. I pour the red liquid over the white mound, watching it glisten and the vapor rising as Louis bends that military instrument into a beam of lyrical sound. Perhaps I like Louis Armstrong because he's made poetry out of being invisible. I think it must be because he's unaware that he is invisible, and my own grasp of invisibility aids me to understand his music. Once when I asked for a cigarette, some jokers gave me a reefer, which I lighted when I got home, and sat listening to my phonograph. It was a strange evening. Invisibility, let me explain, gives one a slightly different sense of time. You're never quite on the beat. Sometimes you're ahead and sometimes behind. Instead of the swift and imperceptible flowing of time, you are aware of its nodes, those points where time stands still or from which it leaps ahead. And you slip into the breaks and look around. That's what you hear vaguely in Louis' music. Once I saw a prize fighter boxing a yokel. The fighter was swift and amazingly scientific. His body was one violent flow of rapid rhythmic action. He hit the yokel 100 times, while the yokel held up his arms in stunned surprise. But suddenly the yokel, rolling about in the gale of boxing gloves, struck one blow, and knocked science, speed, and footwork as cold as a well-digger's posterior. The smart money hit the canvas. The long shot got the nod. The yokel had simply stepped inside of his opponent's sense of time. So under the spell of the reefer I discovered a new analytical way of listening to music. The unheard sounds came through, and each melodic line existed of itself, stood out clearly from all the rest, said its piece, and waited patiently for the other voices to speak. That night I found myself hearing not only in time, but in space as well. I not only entered the music, but descended, like Dante, into its depths. And beneath the swiftness of the hot tempo there was a slower tempo, and a cave, and I entered it, and looked around, and heard an old woman singing a spiritual, as full of Weltschmerz as flamenco. And beneath that lay a still lower level on which I saw a beautiful girl, the color of ivory, pleading in a voice like my mother's, as she stood before a group of slave owners who bid for her naked body. And below that I found a lower level, and a more rapid tempo, and I heard someone shout, "Brothers and sisters, my text this morning is the blackness of blackness." And a congregation of voices answered, "That blackness is most black, brother, most black. In the beginning, at the very start," they cried, "there was blackness, preach it. And the sun, Lord, was bloody red, red. Now black is," the preacher shouted, "bloody." I said, "Black is, preach it, brother, and black ain't red, Lord, red." He said, "It's red." "Amen, brother, black will get you. Yes, it will. Yes, it will." And black won't. No, it won't. It do, Lord, and it don't. Hallelujah. It'll put you glory, glory, oh my Lord, in the whale's belly. Preach it, dear brother, and make you tempt good God Almighty. Old Aunt Nellie, black will make you black, or black will unmake you. Ain't it the truth, Lord? And at that point a voice of trombone timbre screamed at me, "Get out of here, you fool. Is you ready to commit treason?" And I tore myself away, hearing the old singer of spirituals moaning, "Go curse your God, boy, and die." I stopped and questioned her, asked her what was wrong. "I dearly loved my master, son," she said. "You should have hated him," I said. "He gave me several sons," she said, "and because I loved my sons, I learned to love their father, though I hated him too." "I too have become acquainted with ambivalence," I said. "That's why I'm here." "What's that?" "Nothing. A word that doesn't explain it." "Why do you moan?" "I moan this way 'cause he's dead," she said. "Then tell me, who is that laughing upstairs?" "Them's my sons. They glad." "Yes, I can understand that too," I said. "I laugh too, but I moan too." He promised to set us free, but he never could bring himself to do it. Still, I loved him. Loved him? You mean? "Oh, yes, but I loved something else even more." "What more?" "Freedom. Freedom," I said. "Maybe freedom lies in hating." "Nah, son, it's in loving. I loved him and give him the poison, and he withered away like a frostbit apple. Them boys would have torn him to pieces with their homemade knives." "A mistake was made somewhere," I said. "I'm confused." And I wished to say other things, but the laughter upstairs became too loud and moan-like for me, and I tried to break out of it, but I couldn't. Just as I was leaving, I felt an urgent desire to ask her what freedom was, and went back. She sat with her head in her hands, moaning softly. Her leather-brown face was filled with sadness. "Old woman, what is this freedom you love so well?" I asked around a corner of my mind. She looked surprised, then thoughtful, then baffled. "I done forgot, son. It's all mixed up. First I think it's one thing, then I think it's another. It gets my head to spinning. I guess now it ain't nothing but knowing how to say what I got up in my head. But it's a hard job, son. Too much is done happened to me in too short a time. It's like I have a fever. Every time I start to walk, my head gets to swirling and I fall down. Or if it ain't that, it's the boys. They get to laughing and want to kill up the white folks. They's bitter, that's what they is. But what about freedom? Leave me alone, boy. My head aches." I left her, feeling dizzy myself. I didn't get far. Suddenly one of the sons, a big fellow 6 feet tall, appeared out of nowhere and struck me with his fist. "What's the matter, man?" I cried. "You made Ma cry." "But how?" I said, dodging a blow. "Asking her them questions, that's how. Get out of here and stay. And next time you got questions like that, ask yourself." He held me in a grip like cold stone, his fingers fastening upon my windpipe until I thought I would suffocate before he finally allowed me to go. I stumbled about dazed, the music beating hysterically in my ears. It was dark. My head cleared, and I wandered down a dark, narrow passage, thinking I heard his footsteps hurrying behind me. I was sore, and into my being had come a profound craving for tranquility, for peace and quiet. a state I felt I could never achieve. For one thing, the trumpet was blaring and the rhythm was too hectic. A tom-tom beating like heart thuds began drowning out the trumpet, filling my ears. I longed for water, and I heard it rushing through the cold manes my fingers touched as I felt my way. But I couldn't stop to search because of the footsteps behind me. "Hey, Rass," I called. "Is it you? Destroyer? Reinhardt?" No answer, only the rhythmic footsteps behind me. Once I tried crossing the road, but a speeding machine struck me, scraping the skin from my leg as it roared past. Then somehow I came out of it, ascending hastily from this underworld of sound, to hear Louis Armstrong innocently asking, "What did I do to be so black and blue?" At first I was afraid. This familiar music had demanded action, the kind of which I was incapable. And yet had I lingered there beneath the surface, I might have attempted to act. Nevertheless, I know now that few really listen to this music. I sat on the chair's edge in a soaking sweat, as though each of my 1,369 bulbs had every one become a Klieg light in an individual setting for a third degree with Rass and Reinhardt in charge. It was exhausting, as though I had held my breath continuously for an hour under the terrifying serenity that comes from days of intense hunger. And yet it was a strangely satisfying experience for an invisible man to hear the silence of sound. I had discovered unrecognized compulsions of my being, even though I could not answer yes to their promptings. I haven't smoked a reefer since, however, not because they're illegal, but because to see around corners is enough. That is not unusual when you are invisible, but to hear around them is too much. It inhibits action, and despite Brother Jack and all that sad lost period of the Brotherhood, I believe in nothing if not in action. Please, a definition. A hibernation is a covert preparation for a more overt action. Besides, the drug destroys one's sense of time completely. If that happened, I might forget to dodge some bright morning, and some cluck would run me down with an orange and yellow streetcar, or a bilious bus. Or I might forget to leave my hole when the moment for action presents itself. Meanwhile, I enjoy my life with the compliments of monopolated light and power. Since you never recognize me even when in closest contact with me, and since no doubt you'll hardly believe that I exist, it won't matter if you know that I tapped a power line leading into the building and ran it into my hole in the ground. Before that I lived in the darkness into which I was chased, but now I see. I have illuminated the blackness of my invisibility, and vice versa, and so I play the invisible music of my isolation. The last statement doesn't seem just right, does it? But it is. You hear this music simply because music is heard and seldom seen, except by musicians. Could this compulsion to put invisibility down in black and white be thus an urge to make music of invisibility? But I am an orator, a rabble-rouser. Am? I was, and perhaps shall be again. Who knows? All sickness is not unto death, neither is invisibility. I can hear you say, "What a horrible, irresponsible bastard," and you're right. I leap to agree with you. I am one of the most irresponsible beings that ever lived. Irresponsibility is part of my invisibility. Any way you face it, it is a denial. But to whom can I be responsible, and why should I be, when you refuse to see me? And wait until I reveal how truly irresponsible I am. Responsibility rests upon recognition, and recognition is a form of agreement. Take the man whom I almost killed. Who was responsible for that near murder? I? I don't think so, and I refuse it. I won't buy it. You can't give it to me. He bumped me. He insulted me. Shouldn't he, for his own personal safety, have recognized my hysteria, my danger potential? He, let us say, was lost in a dream world. But didn't he control that dream world, which, alas, is only too real? And didn't he rule me out of it? And if he had yelled for a policeman, wouldn't I have been taken for the offending one? Yes, yes, yes. Let me agree with you. I was the irresponsible one, for I should have used my knife to protect the higher interests of society. Some day that kind of foolishness will cause us tragic trouble. All dreamers and sleepwalkers must pay the price, and even the invisible victim is responsible for the fate of it all. All dreamers and sleepwalkers must pay the price, and even the invisible victim is responsible for the fate of all. But I shirked that responsibility. I became too snarled in the incompatible notions that buzzed within my brain. I was a coward. But what did I do to be so blue? Bear with me.